All right, I'm going to make somewhat tentative case. No, I'm pretty confident. Left-wing case for tariffs. Because when Occupy Wall Street broke out in about 2008, it had followed a movement on the left of alter globalization. And a lot of the energies of what you might call like the radical left or the anti-capitalist left, anarchists and stuff like that. Anarchists, mostly anarchists. What they were doing was alter globalization. This is also where Russell Brand's politics come from. If anybody's wondering what that dude's deal is, he's sort of a hippie naturalist anarchist who got his bearings on what anarchism means during the alter globalization movement, and then the left him behind, and he still believes the same things that he did back then, and so those beliefs have now been estranged to the right, and now he's finding more voices on the right that agree with him, both about vaccines and about a bunch of other issues, and so that's sending him rightward. I feel it's a damn shame the left keeps contradicting itself in ways that cause people who developed their set of ideas from the left to then get pushed out and estranged. That seems like a bad way to exist as a group of people. But yeah, alter globalization was a movement. The name alter globalization was because some people refer to themselves as anti-globalization, and that received way too much pushback. So then some people started calling themselves alter globalizationists, calling for somewhat more relocalized economics, more localized food systems for the sake of our environment and for the sake of pushing back against global capitalism. And then Occupy broke out. A lot of these same ideas were brought into the series of authors that emerged post-Occupy Wall Street. And so there's this enormous body of left-wing literature on the case for, now it doesn't usually say the word tariff, but on the case for pushing back against neoliberal globalization and the state of the global economy, which lacks clear policy direction. What does that mean? What would it mean to push back? Right? And then some of them do actually advocate tariffs. Historically, the socialist left has long been protectionists. Historically, advocating for tariffs has been a left-wing thing to do. Being against that is kind of new, and there's a case to be made for it, right? You can be, I'm not trying to say that anybody on the left who is anti-tariffs is completely contradictory. You can be a progressive who wants a strong welfare state and some amount of limitations on free market capitalism, but who still believes that generally open borders, trade, and global cooperation is a generally desirable thing. That's a thing a lot of people believe. It's not the position of the anti-capitalist left, historically. And so it's weird that there are seemingly zero voices of the anti-capitalist left speaking in support of Donald Trump's tariffs. I find that strange. So why would you support tariffs? Because if you are on the left right now, if you're a liberal, here's what I'm guessing you heard about tariffs. I'm guessing you've heard that people on the right don't know what they are, that they think other countries will pay for those tariffs, and that actually we'll pay for those tariffs, and so it's going to rise the prices of all of our consumer goods. Yes, all of that is objectively correct. Yes, it will. They are right about that. Well, the rising prices of consumer goods, they're right about it, but they need to moderate it somewhat. So, let me first, before making the case for tariffs as a policy, let me set the stage a little bit. Here's how I think globalization functions. It's what's called the race to the bottom. Let's say the United States passes some or another form of environmental regulation that requires companies to do blah, 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 in order to function within the United States. And they're doing it so that these companies can be better stewards of our shared natural environment. That's a left-wing thing, right? Left-wing people love that stuff. Okay, so they do that, and then the companies don't want to follow those regulations. So what do? Well, they're multinational organizations. A lot of these companies these days, they have a headquarters or whatever where they're legally stationed, but it doesn't really matter where the headquarters is. What matters is where the factory is. So they'll just move overseas. They'll move production somewhere else. Oh, you want us to follow environmental regulations? I don't want to, so I'll move overseas. And as the cost of shipping has gradually decreased because of technological advancement over the last, always, but let's say the last 50 years, there's been a massive increase in this happening. But there's also been a massive increase of interdependency between nations, which can be a wonderful thing. All right? Trade between nations can be great. It can strengthen our bonds, prevent us from going to war with one another. That's a big thing. It's also horizontal, which I, as somebody interested in a more decentralized, more horizontal society, I kind of like the idea that free trade encourages horizontal collaboration between multiple nations instead of a top-down coercive relationship between some or another body, forcing these organizations to act together. Because if you're, say, a state in the United States, there are top-down rules regarding commerce between states that require more or less free trade. And theoretically, within this coalition, the entire United States imposes rules upon all businesses within the United States from the top down. So one of the nice things about trade is that you can have multiple sites of power, multiple smaller regions or smaller nation states collaborating horizontally instead of doing things top down. Now, if I were a proponent of free trade, this is where I would probably stop talking. I would tell you all of that, and then I'd go, so it's great and wonderful, and it produces economic growth, and it produces specialization. That's great, right? One country can make one thing, and another country can make another thing, and we don't all have to be generalists, Not every country needs to be a jack of all trades that's really good at making every single type of good a service. You can have different small regions. In one region, it's all manufacturing, and in another region, it's all, I shouldn't have said manufacturing. One region, it's all clothes, in another region, it's all food, let's say. The agricultural rural regions will have food. So that's kind of good. The specialization increases efficiency. And this is what you'll learn about trade too in an economics textbook. The economics textbook stops just short of telling you outright that you should endorse free trade. When it teaches you Ricardo's theorem, which is basically the thing I just said, that specialization is very economically beneficial. Look at this beautiful little stream. Oh my God. When it tells you that, it stops just short of explicitly saying you should politically endorse free trade, and if you don't, you're defying the teachings of economics, which is treated as very scientific and expert-y, right? So you have to trust it. You have to believe what the economists say. No. Because as I said earlier, there is a such thing as a race to the bottom where companies can avoid, and I'm using environmental regulation specifically because that is what you might call an externality. So it's a difficult thing for a free market libertarian to push back on, because even a free market libertarian might have to come to acknowledge that some amount of like carbon taxes, or like an economist might have to acknowledge that some amount of carbon taxes might be sensible, right? Like maybe most of the time the free market comes to a rational equilibrium and that's the best thing to do. But when it comes to CO2 production, that's kind of outside the scope of what anybody pays attention to. Consumers don't worry about CO2 production. Workers don't worry about CO2 production. So it's not like worker pay and consumer prices where they come to an equilibrium because everybody involved has something at stake, right? When it comes to climate change, everybody involved doesn't have anything at stake, or at least they can imagine that they don't have anything at stake as it slowly gets worse in the background until it's too late. So let's say we implemented a carbon tax, a big one, here in the USA. We decided we really want to take this climate change stuff seriously, and let's fuck up these carbon emitters, all right? Immediately, what you will see is companies moving overseas. Okay, some of them doing so permanently, because it is just plain cheaper for them to do business over there from now on when there's a carbon tax. And some of them are engaging in what you might call a capital strike, where they sort of threaten to move overseas in order to discourage that policy. Which is why, by the way, we don't enact policies like this. It's because we've been forced not to by capital strikes in the past. Businesses start to say, "Oh, you're not going to want to do that, Mr. Politician. You're not going to want to hold us accountable in that way because we're going to move somewhere else and we're going to take all the jobs with us. And you're going to have to get phone calls from your constituents saying, 'Where did my job go?'" Right? So once moved overseas, these companies are exempt from not just things like carbon taxes, but they're exempt from other things. They're exempt from American manufacturing standards. So there might be certain quality standards that our regulations impose upon products made in America that say you have to make this to a certain level of quality. Products made overseas, not so much. They can have regulatory standards from China, for example, and make a cheap product that gets thrown away very quickly, and again, damages the environment by producing a ton of waste. It also harms the consumer, because the consumer doesn't have good information, so they're going to buy these products not knowing necessarily how cheaply produced they are, and then they're going to need to buy another one in a year, which is why everything sucks now. It's why everything breaks so easily. When your parents and grandparents say, "Oh, they don't make it like they used to," that is because of globalization, or capitalism, or capitalist globalism, whatever you want to call it. It's both, it's all of it. So now, the third sort of pillar of this, right? Because I've just talked about wastefulness and what you might call planned obsolescence, where products are made really cheaply and it hurts the consumer. I've also talked about the environmental pillar of this. The third pillar is the workers' pillar. In some of these countries we trade with, like China, people there are literally enslaved. Or if they're not literally enslaved, they're in a financial position where they are somewhat indebted, which is how slavery also used to work for most people, indentured servitude, right? Okay, well, or maybe they're not literally indebted like an indentured servant, but they're just very, very poor, which is okay, because, companies can move where labor is cheaper, and workers can move where wages are higher because of the free market, right? Except no, because we have all these border regimes preventing the poor people in these countries from actually moving anywhere to seek out higher wages. So the companies can move where labor is as cheap as possible, but human beings who are being exploited cannot move where wages are as high as possible. It is a one side of the free market. So when you want to criticize the companies moving where labor is cheapest, they tell you free market. And then, when you're trying to talk about the movement of people, talk about immigration, all of a sudden, the free market thing goes out the window. That's how the system is operated forever. So, all of these problems of globalization are usually things the left kind of has to be at least somewhat tenuously aware of when talking about politics in order to talk about politics at all. So, for example, whenever a liberal tells you not to shop at Shein, whatever that fucking company's name is, because they're fast fashion, and they have all these terrible worker practices, and they hurt the environment, and it's just very unethical, and you really shouldn't shop there. You really shouldn't shop there. If you knew what you were contributing to, let me show you this YouTube video. Let me show you this YouTube video about what you're contributing to. Whenever they say that, they're implying an understanding of the exact system of globalization I'm describing. And they're implying that they're against it. And they're implying that people, in general, should be willing to pay slightly higher prices in order to push back against that system, right? Because they're going out and they're not shopping at fast fashion and they're buying higher quality clothes, which are typically going to be more expensive. So they're paying the higher prices that they're talking about. So the other aspect to this, well, let me finish the fast fashion rant first. I don't think it makes any sense at all to be so against fast fashion that you're going to actively be mad at random individuals who are usually pretty apolitical for buying clothes that for them were just accessible out there and that are cheap and affordable. It benefits them materially to just buy the cheapest product they can. And you're going to go and you're going to get mad at them for it. And definitely, even if you want to get mad at them for it, even if you believe in that ethical consumerism logic, and I don't, okay, you should then say that we should do something about it collectively on a policy level. And there is too many people, hundreds of millions of people right now, who simultaneously believe in yelling at people for buying Shein and are also staunchly opposed to Donald Trump's tariffs. And it makes no sense. So what would the tariff do? Let's return to that. What would the tariff do? The tariff would raise prices for any of these companies stationed overseas, which would encourage these companies that have fled overseas to relocate to the United States. Okay, because now they no longer have the same financial incentive that sent them overseas. Now, theoretically, given the targeted nature of the tariffs, they could just relocate to somewhere else, right? It's cheap to produce things in Taiwan, too. So if you place tariffs on just China, then production could move to Taiwan. But there are niche benefits in there as well. Like China, as far as I know, has more slaves than Taiwan. So that's kind of a plus side, a little perk, right? Ultimately, broad-based tariffs on all countries that aren't this country would probably lead to at least some amount of relocation. So that's a positive economic benefit for Americans, is that jobs would come back here. And those jobs would be better paying because we pay better in the United States. And the products produced by those jobs would be higher quality, so it would produce less environmental waste. And consumers would be getting a better deal because they wouldn't be buying cheap, shitty products that break very easily. Now, this is the part where liberals have been saying conservatives don't understand tariffs. This is the part where they've been saying that, right? Is that, will prices be raised for American consumers? Probably at least somewhat, if tariffs are enacted, yeah. At least somewhat, at least in the short term. Any products that aren't made in America are going to get more expensive. But you know what happens when products that are not made in America get more expensive? Consumers start buying more products that are made in America. And so that means all your local small businesses, right? All the local small businesses that liberals, again, are constantly talking about how important it is that we support these small businesses. It's so important that we go out and we spend at small businesses. Oh, you're spending at a big corporation? Gross. I spend my money at small businesses, thank you very much, right? That's what this policy would encourage. It would encourage people to spend more money at small businesses because the price differential is not as drastic as it previously would have been. Oh my God. So yeah, so you would spend more money at small businesses. And then the last part is, would these companies, not another country, not will China pay for it? No. Will the companies, the multinational companies that are having these tariffs placed on them, will they choose to raise prices? I say choose because they like to act like there's no wiggle room. This is a sort of a fundamental component of how corporate defense ideas operate in the free market, right? How they use free market ideas is they like to say that these companies are always at this perfect equilibrium where they're paying their workers the exact right amount, and they're charging their consumers the exact right amount, and they're paying their executives the exact right amount. And if they paid their executives any more, they would be wasting money and their business would be less successful. And if they were paying their executives any less, they wouldn't be able to get such talented executives. And then they would be less successful as a business, right? So they're paying the executives the exact amount that they need to be paid according to the equilibrium of the free market. And that's bullshit. They're paying their executives way the fuck ton more than they deserve, way the fuck ton more than any value they provide. Their executives are making money off of a ton of things. They're making money off of government interventions into the economy, like the raising of interest rates, which creates unemployment and lowers workers' wages, driving up profits, which then go directly into the pockets of the people who own these companies. They benefit from all kinds of taking advantage of people, right? They benefit from, financiers benefit from payday loans. Homeowners benefit from contracts like timeshares, where you don't understand what you're getting into until you get into it. Landlords, I should say, not homeowners. So, in general, there is a general taking advantage of labor immobility, of human irrationality that goes into these executives' pay that is well above and beyond any actual productivity they give to these companies. And so, yes, if tariffs are enacted, many of these companies probably will choose to raise prices on consumers rather than the people who own them losing money. You're correct about that. You got me there. They probably will choose to do that. But they don't have to, and we don't have to let them. That's where this becomes a broader political theory, right? Bernie Sanders at one point called for a policy, he was calling for a raising of corporate tax rates in the United States. And people said, well, if you raise corporate tax rates, companies will just flee elsewhere. They'll move overseas. And he said, we'll charge them an exit tax. A 60% exit tax. In other words, we don't have to let them. We don't have to let them decide that the collective governing body of our society, the government, we don't have to let them decide to shop around for whatever government is the most lenient towards them. And even if you like that idea of multinational corporations shopping around for whatever government is more lenient towards them because you happen to be inclined towards freer markets, it doesn't mean freer markets, because whatever country is, better to them can also mean subsidizing them. It can mean giving them free money from the government. It can mean corporate bailouts when the banks fail. All of the things that libertarians and leftists agree on are also a result of the same exact multinational corporations pressuring governments into enacting corporate-friendly policies. So, no, I'm not going to be opposed to somebody in a different political party from me, Trump, enacting policies that we have desperately needed, and that any principled leftist should probably endorse and should have been smart enough to already be endorsing and talking about these policies before it became a national discussion out of Trump's mouth.